Hello.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here on Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Worcestertown. We are delighted to welcome you all here tonight to celebrate the launch of The Everlasting Road by Wab Kinew. This is, of course, the follow-up to his incredible and acclaimed and award-winning novel, Walking in Two Worlds, and we couldn't be more pleased that you folks are able to gather both here physically as well as virtually to celebrate its journey into the world. We're also particularly delighted because we run our bestseller list every Wednesday, and this book is already #1 on our young adult charts. Which is always a good sign, particularly before we've even officially launched the book. So I won't take up too much of your time. We have an incredible host here as well that we're going to be bringing up in just a moment. Just a few very brief housekeeping notes before we begin. So there'll be a reading from up here, and then there'll be a conversation which will take place on the chairs to my left. Following the conversation, there'll be an opportunity for you folks here in the audience to ask any questions you might have. If you do have a question, please feel free to just raise your hand and I'll run up to you with a microphone. And please rest assured this is not a comment on your ability to project your voice. It just ensures that everybody who's watching at home can actually hear the question and prevents us from having to repeat it as well, slowing the momentum of the event. So thank you all very much for that indulgence. The only other thing I'll put in your head is that at the end of the event, we'll ask you all to remain in your seats just for one moment while we safely transport Wab to the signing table just beside our cash desk. I'll have more details about signing procedure at the end. I'm sure you'll all be looking forward to that. So that's the only thing I'll put in your brain just right now. But now I do have the incredible pleasure of introducing your host for this evening. Tasha Spillett-Sumner is an Inuit, Cree, and Trinidadian award-winning poet and author who is also working on her doctoral degree in Indigenous land-based education. Oh, she's got it already. Well then, Dr. Tasha Spillett-Sumner takes her home on Treaty 1 territory in Manitoba, where she raises her daughter Isabella with her husband. I've also been looking forward to introducing you as a doctor for a long time, so this is particularly delightful. Tasha is the author of the award-winning Surviving the City graphic novel series and the absolutely sumptuously beautiful picture books, I Sang You Down from the Stars, and Beautiful You, Beautiful Me. Please give a very warm welcome to Tasha Spillett-Sumner.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tasha Spillett-Sumner, and this is Isabella Gijigoyabek. Can you say bonjour? So we have the pleasure of hosting tonight's book launch, of course, for her godfather, Wab Kinew. Say thank you, Wab.
Thank you.
So we're delighted this is our second book launch that we're hosting for Wab, and then introducing this beautiful book, The Everlasting Road, to our ever-loving community. So we know Wab, of course, as a father, as a husband, as the leader of the NDP party and the future premier of Manitoba, and of course, an award-winning author. So let's give a warm welcome to Wab Kinew.
Thank you so much, Tasha and Izzy. Thank you. Great job. And hello, Tubba and Lisa. I want to also thank John for the amazing welcome. He's got probably one of the best voices out there. The way he introduces the authors here is really great. And I want to thank you all for coming. It's like hosting a party when you have a book launch. You always worry that like no one's going to show up. So thank you so much for being here and taking the time. I really appreciate everybody coming out this evening. And I also do want to point out that that was my mom who was heckling John at the start of the event too. So that's hopefully the only heckling we'll have this evening. Yeah. So this is The Everlasting Road. It is sequel to a book that I wrote that came out a couple of years ago now called Walking in Two Worlds. And this is a protagonist on the front, And she's like, by day, kind of a shy person, growing up on the res, going to high school in a nearby community. But she has this alternate existence, an alternate reality online, where she's a gamer. And not just any gamer, she's like the biggest gamer in the world. Millions of subscribers follow her and watch her streams and stuff like that. So if you don't understand what any of this means, you can ask a teenager in your life and they can explain Twitch and subscribers on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the first book, I really enjoyed writing it. It was my first time writing a work of fiction. And this is the follow-up, and it just picks up the story a few years later. She suffered a personal loss, her brother, and she's still trying to balance that two worlds of what she does online as this like superhero type person and who she is in the day-by-day world, just trying to sort through all the normal ups and downs of being a young person today, which I once was back in the last millennium. So, so I'm just gonna read chapter 7, just the start of this. And part of what I wanted to do in both of these books is just show a glimpse of what it's like in some of our communities with people growing up around the culture. So this is a scene after a funeral for somebody she cares deeply about. She just goes to check out a powwow. So this is just kind of a little snapshot of that. Feeling lighter than she had in recent memory, and with her heart filled with the joyful feeling of reconnecting with her brother in the verse a few days prior, Bugz pushed the heavy metal door to the community hall open. Instantly, she was hit with the sound of ringing bells, the up-tempo rhythm of a powwow drum, and the amplified voice of an MC calling everyone to dance. The gym looked completely different than when she'd been here for her brother's funeral earlier that week. The people gathered today were talking and laughing excitedly. It was a one-day powwow the res was holding to mark the start of spring. At the center of it all was a crowd of dancers in both regalia and street clothes making their way around the circle in a clockwise direction. Bugz moved forward through the crowd and past folks nodding their heads to her. She walked up to the edge of the makeshift dance arbor and felt her heart lift. She knew the song. It was an intertribal, a song calling everyone to dance. Still, Bugz held back. She'd been taught to avoid participating too soon in spiritual or cultural events while grieving. But she wasn't sure how long she was supposed to grieve. A day, a month, a year? Rather than step out into the dancing arena, she walked over to the drum group and joined the crowd of 20 or so who gathered to watch the singers. As the cycle of the song began anew with a lead from one of the male singers, she watched as Stormy Chalice and a few other young women stood circling the men who sat singing around the drum, pounding the rhythm of the song. At the appropriate time, her friends' voices jumped in and grabbed the song, piercing the melody an octave higher than the men. Bugz hummed along, but felt herself held back, perhaps by the weight of tradition, perhaps by the loneliness she felt. Bugz turned to see past the crowd of onlookers. Like clockwork, a men's traditional dancer approached the drum, still keeping time with the beat. The crowd parted like some biblical sea, and the dancer withdrew an eagle bone whistle from beneath his shirt. He blew on it 4 times, the high-pitched scream evoking an eagle spinning in mid-flight, calling the drum group to sing the song 4 times through again. The entire spirit of the powwow seemed to lift, and the dancers in the circle picked up their pace. Other dancers came forward and circled the men's traditional dancer like a breakdance cipher. He got low, and he showed off his moves. Bugz felt the wave of pride wash over her mind, body, and spirit. For all she'd been through recently, including some of the heavier moments in this very room, there was nowhere she'd rather be. She shut her eyes and waited for her friends to start singing again. As they did, she pushed her voice out hard, falling into perfect harmony with Stormy Chalice and the other young people. Bugz felt the melody trace its way through the air like an eagle soaring above the trees until finally it fell and trailed off with the vocals. Hey, 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 yo. Bugz and the other women dragged this part out, seeming to slow down time as the lead singer kicked out his voice to start another push-up, another cycle of the song. The drummers picked up the beat, the traditional dancer blew his whistle again, and the powwow's energy amped up higher still. That's my reading. I always like to share a bit of the culture, even when I'm writing about other stuff like gaming and things like that. And that's a bit of that part of the book. Be good stuff. So I'll invite Tasha back up and we can jump into our conversation.
We just pause for microphones.
No, you can sit
Okay.
down and then I'll adjust the microphone. I'll just let you know when the camera is on.
Okay. Taller person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are you? Well, you can come if you want to. Oh, wow.
Okay, John, help to move it. Okay, so we'll see how this curious situation goes. So I know that before I left the house tonight, it was a great ordeal to get Izzy to choose her wardrobe. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your wardrobe choice tonight.
Oh, thanks for asking. I thought you would never notice. I asked Tasha to ask me this question right away at the start of our conversation. So this is a sweater from, you see the letters PFF and HS. This is Pelican Falls First Nations High School. And it's the sweater that they sent me. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this right at the start is that this is a very unique high school in Northern Ontario, and it is the school to which I dedicated both the first book in the series and the second book in the series. So if you look at the front in the dedication, you'll see it's to all the students at Pelican Falls. And the reason why I wanted to talk about them a bit is because the students at this high school were some of the inspiration to write the first book. I visited Pelican in, I guess a few times, starting about 12 or 13 years ago. And I was really taken aback and impressed by all the reading that the students were doing at this school. But they were reading like Harry Potter and Hunger Games and stuff like that. And it really got me thinking like, wow, wouldn't it be an amazing thing to reach out to these students, but maybe write something that's more relatable to those of us who grew up like with gravel roads and pine trees and that sort of environment, as opposed to like the castles and dragons and things like that that we might see in other young adult fiction. And I also like to highlight Pelican because it's a really interesting school with a very unique history. It's actually built on the site of the former Pelican Falls Residential School, just outside of Sioux Lookout in northwestern Ontario. And today what it is it is a boarding school, but the students are attending there, of their own volition through a shared decision with their families. And they come from Northern First Nations in Ontario that don't have high schools in them. So in order to continue grades 9, 10, 11, 12, they have to go to Pelican. And it's this amazing place that is full of all this history. It's a place where young people are learning who they are and discovering what they want to do with the rest of their lives. And they're in transition between life on an isolated First Nation towards a more urban setting, but kind of literally in between those two worlds. And also just dealing with all the ups and downs of being a young person away from home for the first time and trying to navigate who they are. So to be there and to have like all these different things going on and talking to those students and to be able to have what they gave me by way of inspiration lead to not only one book, but now the chance to write 2 books has been just like super, super gratifying. And it's led me to just have this immense sense of gratitude towards Pelican Falls, the school, and to all the students there. So I always want to begin by shouting them out and to say thank you for the sweater that they sent me. So I'm wearing the sweater in the author photo as well, just to try and highlight their school. And their principal, in the note that he sent when he sent me this sweater, he said, we thank you and want you to keep highlighting Pelican Falls. And we want you to bring attention, I'm paraphrasing here, we want you to bring attention to the unequal funding for First Nation schools across Canada and to help encourage people to make sure that this gets fixed so that we can live up to that phrase, every child matters, and ensure that every student in Canada gets a decent education.
Well, thank you for that. Of course, we all want the best for our kids, and we do our best to educate our kids both in our homes and beyond. And I think one of the scariest things for parents is to think about who's going to care for your children and influence your children beyond your home. So, you know, that call to ensure that there's equitable education for our children is so important. I love visiting with Bugz again. I love Bugz as a protagonist, just a really strong character who reminds me so much. I think I said this in your last book launch, so much of Lisa and your sister. I'm curious to know, how has Bugz influenced you as a person? You know, as authors, we write our characters, but as they grow and evolve through the books and the storylines, they also impact us. So I'm curious to know, this is one of my questions. I'm curious to know how Bugz has influenced you as a man in your career and your personal life.
Well, I think that's a pretty good question. Like, when I was writing the first book, I really tried to wrap my head around the character, and I did so by leaning on the people you mentioned, my sister Shawan, who is, you know, one of the inspirations for the character, and Lisa, my wife, who you saw here momentarily before she had to chase after our youngest. But in the second one, I felt like I already knew the character, and it was like, it's just about bringing her back out again and watching her and the other characters in the book just sort of take flight again. So if I had to say what I learned, I would say that through that process, you know, I really gained an appreciation as a writer for how you have to take the character seriously, and the same kind of nuance and complex reactions and like layers of emotion that you might have reacting even to one single event that you do as a real person. You have to kind of invest that and honor your character, that they're going to be complex enough and not just like some one-dimensional caricature thing, but they're actually a fully formed person in your mind who might like be at the same time flattered, frustrated, you know, kind of looking for a hopeful thing in some tragedy that's befallen them, just like we are in our real lives with complexity. And so yeah, so I guess kind of on a craft level, I think I really learned a lot about character in writing these two books.
Yeah, thank you. So we return back to the Floraverse. How has the Floraverse changed or evolved from the first book to the second?
Well, shortly after the first book came out, and this is like the online world, it's like the gaming world that the characters inhabit. It's kind of like a cross between like Fortnite and Roblox or Minecraft or something. It's like a big online universe. And I think maybe one of the major things happened after I put out the first book, and we're talking about Floraverse, is Facebook came out and rebranded themselves Meta and started talking metaverse. So it kind of like ruined that term a little bit. But in terms of the book, the idea is basically there's this whole online virtual world, which kind of exists right now in the way of like Xbox Live, PlayStation 5, Twitch, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat. You put all these things together, we do have this kind of virtual existence that we all participate in to varying degrees. And this is just taking it a step further where it's kind of universal. And one of the ideas is that in having an Anishinaabe person be one of the more popular gamers in this world, she's been able to recreate huge aspects of Anishinaabe culture online. And so one of the interesting things that happened is, you know, I envisioned an Anishinaabe person recreating supernatural creatures, Shubiju, Panacea, people like that in the online world. And then you had, like over the past year, Anishinaabe kids playing Roblox, creating virtual powwows and stuff like that. So it's kind of happening in a certain way, though obviously kids are doing it in a much more like cool and imaginative way than I would have predicted. But it's still kind of cool to see that shared online presence come about. So in this second one, The first book is about Bugz, the character. And so if that one's Star Wars, this one's Empire Strikes Back, because this introduces a villain and a bad person for the protagonist to have to go to war against.
And, you know, in this second book, grief is such a big theme. And I'm curious to know, what was your, I guess, intention in sending grief, and what do you hope in contending, the protagonist contending with grief, the impact on the young readers might be?
I've spoken to a ton of teachers and educators and counselors who say that we don't do a good job as a society of helping equip young people to deal with grief. And it can be grief for really heavy things that a lot of young people in many of our communities have to contend with, like whether it's like truly life and death situations, or mourning a loved one, or some of the challenging things around self-harm and mental health. But it can also be other forms of grief too, like when you have to move and you're grieving friendships, or you're moving on to a different school environment or a different sports environment. You're having to grieve a stage of your life that you're moving on from. And so whatever kind of situation that's causing us some sort of heartache or some kind of grief, I think that we as a society, particularly coming out of the pandemic, where we asked a ton of young people, we asked them to give up so much for a few years. I think we could do well just to try and equip young people with some techniques for how to handle grief and how to be able to process grieving in a healthy way. And so that's like fully educators and teachers in my life who've kind of shared some of that with me. So that's their insight. And then kind of where my thinking came in is growing up in the Anishinaabe community, I know that traditional Indigenous cultures have a very rich framework for helping people grieve. And so I thought, well, if this is something that young people need assistance with, maybe we can introduce some of the thoughts from traditional culture, some of the teachings from traditional culture, share it with them in kind of a modern, tech-friendly context, and maybe there's something in there that's going to help a young person. And so that's where the title comes in. The title is obviously a metaphor for life and the afterlife, the everlasting road that we're all walking on. But that is the English translation of the Anishinaabe word for the journey that our spirits go on after we leave this world. Kagege Waikena, the everlasting road. And it's also a reference in one of our traditional religions to heaven, right? And the place that we go after here. So I just wanted to show a young person who hopefully the readers relate to, and she's going through a tough time in her life. And while she's finding supports through friends and the stuff that she's interested in, she's also able to see from the Anishinaabe culture a source of strength and an ability to find healing and a way to move forward in her life. And so, yeah, so kind of a heavy topic, but one that I thought is relevant to what's going on for a lot of people today. And I just feel like traditional Indigenous cultures are so beautiful that I wanted to find a way, while still being respectful of the authentic tradition, to share some of those practices with a young reader or with a contemporary reader.
And that makes me think of a conversation that we had at your last book launch about the inclusion of our, traditional ways of being, our ideologies in spaces that sometimes those things don't get incorporated in, and how sometimes there can be a division in the community around what's allowed and what's not allowed in terms of the specific knowledges that get included. And I'm wondering, so you put it all out, you put it out there in your first book. I'm curious to know if you've had any, hesitancy, any backlash, or, any encouragement around continuing or thinking cautiously around including our traditional ways of knowing and being in ways that are accessible to people beyond our communities?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I've definitely thought a ton about it. There's actually an acknowledgement at the start of the book where I basically just say outright that, the cultural, there's an author's note at the front that says, it makes reference to many Anishinaabe cultural teachings. However, the details and descriptions have been changed slightly to preserve the sanctity of the authentic Anishinaabe traditions. And I did that for a few reasons. I think first and foremost, we have in our traditional culture, like a very high standard for who's allowed to perform a funeral ceremony or who's allowed to help a grieving family. And the reason is because this is not play stuff. This is serious, serious stuff. And you need to be part of something called the Spirit Lodge to be able to conduct those ceremonies. And so to share some of that stuff publicly would be inappropriate. So that's why, you know, I changed it and kind of put it through a filter where, like, if you were a part of that spiritual order, you could read the book and recognize what I'm talking about, but you'd probably also be like, yeah, okay, but he's not just putting it all out there through the Xerox machine and sharing with the general public. And I guess the other reason is just because there are so many interesting questions about ownership and intellectual property in Indigenous cultures and cultural appropriation and stuff like that. And I think that from what I've been able to see, Indigenous nations were brilliant in how sophisticated they set up these intellectual property regimes in traditional cultures, right? Like to be able to use a specific plant medicine or mineral medicine, you need to have not just the knowledge, but you need to be able to explain who gave you that knowledge and like by what right do you claim to be able to practice that to this day. And you know, people, I don't know that everyone has the sense of how sophisticated Indigenous cultures are in that respect, but you know, I'm very reverent of it, like I revere it. And so I want to be very careful knowing that I'm doing something that I think is important, which is to share glimpses of our traditional cultures with a young audience today, but also trying to be true to the idea that, you know, you need to be very reverent and respectful of these things when you're engaging with them.
Yeah, I'm always curious about those things because of course, you know, we want young people to be able to access, it's within their birthright to be able to access as much as they can. And yet there always are these fine lines and, you know, careful conversations to have with maybe generations older than us who, you know, have experienced tremendous loss and who might have different feelings as to what we hold to ourselves and what we share more openly.
And maybe there's a dimension that faces the broader community or the non-Indigenous audience as well, which is to say that if part of the contention of colonialism was to deny the civilizations that existed here before and their sophistication prior to the founding of Canada or even prior to that, then maybe like some of the way that you contemporize and have a more holistic view of what our society should be is to share the beauty and richness of our traditional cultures with the broader community, because how else are people gonna be able to undo some of the attitudes of the past unless they're able to appreciate some of the richness and sophistication of what we get so excited by.
And you know what I really liked about your response was talking about the multi-leveled fluency. So there are parts of it that will be recognizable to those who have had, you know, heavy grounding in these cultural traditions, who will be like, they'll be able to pick out, oh, I recognize this name, or I recognize this archetype of a character that belongs in this story. And there will be people who will also be new language, new ways of thinking. So I wanted to bring us to maybe something a little bit more. Now this is going to the, like, I don't know, I know there's a 13-year-old in the audience or near 13-year-old. So I think that if I think about near 13-year-old me, I would be excited about the kind of romance that's budding with some of the characters in the book. So writing romance with young people, or romantic scenes at least. Is this something that's new to you? How did you kind of get there for yourself? Like, were there things were there people that helped you think about what might romantic scenes look like for this age group, or how did you? I'm curious to know. Yeah. How did you get there?
Well, obviously Lisa is my greatest.
I looked at her. I was like, what's happening in the romance?
But it's an interesting question because I visited a different school in Northwestern Ontario in Kenora, and like there's a little bit of that in the first book, right? Like there's the two main characters, right? There's Bugz and then there's Fang, who's a Uyghur Muslim who basically Fresh Prince of Bel-Air's his way to North America and ends up living in Bugs's community. And that is a verb, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, your way to the side of the world.
This is a story all
There you go. So there is a bit of that. And like I visited the school in Kenora and it was like, grade 7 and 8 split class. So like target demo. And, even though I didn't think there was that much of it, when we got to the discussion, it's all they wanted to talk about. They're like, this is amazing. What happens next? Did they kiss? Did they actually kiss? What happens? Right? So that kind of really opened my eyes. It's like, okay, like, writing as an adult for a young audience, I have certain ideas about what, they're going to be interested in, but then I guess you have to be responsive and listening to the reader too, and kind of this is what they want to see. So I really have a great editorial team at Tundra Books. In addition to Lisa, you got Lynn Misson and Peter Phillips being some of the folks, and they are just really good at like bouncing things back and forth and just trying to get the tone and the approach right. But I also think, like, as it pertains to the title and theme of the book, when we go through tough times, like, it's the people around us who help us. And that was one of the things that I wanted to get right, is the protagonist Bugz is developing a romantic relationship with this other character, Fang, but they're also helping each other through a really tough time. And so I just kind of wanted to show that aspect of a relationship as well.
Okay. I only have one more question. So I really have a lot of respect for Bugz as a character. I think because she reminds me so much of Lisa Wab and Shawan, who's just two incredible women. So I'm curious to know, if Bugz is sitting right here, what piece of advice does she give to you as you pursue to become the first Anishinaabe Premier Manitoba?
You better win. Don't mess this up. And do a good job when you get in. Which I think is the same advice everyone in Manitoba is giving me right now. So I take it very seriously. And I think maybe on a, because I'm being a bit of a smart aleck there, like maybe on a more serious level, like what I really, I think, enjoyed being able to articulate through the character Bugz is this thing that I think exists in so many of us, including, I think, you, if I could be so bold as to say, and Lisa and Shawan, which is like, life is hard, life is beautiful, life has its ups, life has its downs, and yet there's like something in you that just keeps driving you forward. And whatever that is, if it finds its way out through video games or music or dance or school or politics or business or writing or whatever it is, just like keep feeding that and keep nourishing that and allow it to be something positive and beneficial to you. And I think that, even though the books have different themes in terms of, the first one's about identity maybe, and the second one's more about grieving, the thing that I think is driving the action in both books is you have this character who just has like this force at the center of her being. And to me, like, I think however you want to articulate that, like, make the most of your life, just ride the wave, just keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep on going. To me, I think that's the advice that Bugz would probably give. And that's why the epigraph at the start is from a poem that I really, really like by a German poet, and just took a quick excerpt from the translation that says, just keep going. No feeling is final.
Great. Well, thank you. That's off the hot seat for me right now. I believe we have some time to open it up to the audience. John with the smooth voice will come and help audience members ask their questions. So if you have questions from the audience, maybe just pop your hand up and John will come on over.
Okay.
I don't mean to be too political, but I was impressed by your response to Monsieur Lagimodière a year ago. So what impressed me was not so much the pushback that was much needed. It was great timing. Was your sense of poise and that you didn't get crazy and that you came across sophisticated. You made your point succinctly. And I was very impressed by that. And you're in my constituency, so I hope you win.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome, sir. Can you tell me where you get these ideas for, this is not the first or second book you've written a few more.
Yep.
So where do you get your inspiration from?
Maybe I could start about what writing means to me and then be able to answer that. And for me, because I'm a busy person and, you know, we have a family that's like super active and we spend a ton of time with each other. For me, writing is my outlet. You know, if I have an extra hour at the end of the week, I'll pull out the laptop and start writing. And I don't necessarily always know like what I'm gonna write, though I do typically like to have a specific idea in mind. But writing for me is, I hear all this stuff going on a day-to-day level, like artificial intelligence, Chat GPT, what's happening with Uyghurs, Uyghur genocide, what's going on with human rights generally, Indigenous identity, indigeneity, contested identities across different cultures, you know, cultural appropriation, politics, pandemic, you know, all these different things. And then when I sit there with a laptop, it gives me a chance to like kind of pull these things out of the ether, if you will, and crystallize my thinking or my feelings about it. And I got great advice from this editor, an editor that I never actually have worked with, but we just, you know, talked a few times. Patrick Crean is the guy's name. He worked for HarperCollins at the time. And he said, writing is about rewriting. Very simple advice, but very true. And it's a variation of Hemingway, who said, you know, the first draft of everything is trash. And he used a much more derogatory term than trash when he was saying that. But it's like, that's the beauty of writing. You write what you think about something, and then you look at it and you're like, that's not actually what I think. I'm going to delete the word at the end and change it. Or actually, it's clearer to a reader if I flip the order, if I flip the clauses in the sentence. And you sit there sometimes for hours and hours, or however long you have, and you just get closer and closer. And hopefully at the end of the process, you actually figure out what you think about a given topic or what you feel about a specific experience. And so that's what writing means to me. And so where did the ideas come from the books? It's through that process, like an iterative process of just mapping these things out. And then, you know, randomly you're like, wow, it'd be cool if there was a kid from the res who was like the biggest gamer in the world. And then, yeah, walking in two worlds. I used to hear that all the time, Indigenous mainstream worlds. But then, well, isn't the two worlds thing for a lot of people today, not just cultural versus mainstream, it's also like online versus real world. Yada, yada, yada. Sit there with the laptop and yeah, it's meditation or, you know, just time to reflect for me. Too much digging.
I didn't think I'd have a question, but you answering this last one, I didn't really know you back then, but I know you as an artist as well. And I feel like there must be an element of you writing some lyrics and how you bring those ideas together. I feel like you just almost rapped right now, just listing off all those thoughts.
Yeah.
So just like a throwback to that. And I think that there's an element of and maybe this is like your artistic expression today. I think a lot of people know you as a politician first, but there's definitely that element of, you know, you're an artist, you exist in this world, it's a very complex world, and your way of, you know, having that as an expression, we're very lucky to have, is through these words. So just shout out.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I do think like, you know, I don't want to trivialize any form of art, but I do think like a lot of creative pursuit is very similar at the end of the day. And like, if like, obviously I'm not going to be a great musician. I'm not going to be a great dancer, but like visual art, writing, I think there's a lot of similarity in some of those creative pursuits. And, you know, I think you see a lot of creative young people who are able to like jump across different genres, different platforms, if you will. And yeah, it's really amazing. And I hope that we can do a good job of continuing to find a way for young creative types to find their voice, even as our media becomes more fragmented and our attention spans become more competition for them. Right? Yeah. So.
I think, John, what's the time? Sorry.
We're just at around 7:40.
Okay. Are there any more questions from our beautiful audience?
It's not a clearly formulated question yet, but based on hearing you, I think what's just so great about this character, Bugz, is that there's this inspiration to embrace the multidimensional aspects of ourselves. And I think even just in your last response, just talking about who you are beyond just the politician that many people see you as, but as this creative artist. And so perhaps you can speak a little bit more, and maybe it was already answered, about how we inspire youth and ourselves even to embrace these multidimensional aspects of who we are as people.
Yeah, I mean, this is not my thought. Many people have said this, but it is interesting how when you're kids, we ask you to be like a Renaissance person, right? Like you're an athlete in gym class and an artist in arts class, and like, you know, you're reading literature in English, and then you're a mathematician and then a scientist later on in the afternoon. And then like later on over the course of our lives, we're like driven towards specialization, which makes sense. Like if you want to be an expert, if you want to be a physician, if you want to be a lawyer, right? If you want to be a PhD educator, you have to specialize. But I think that one of the interesting things about tech is that it offers us and like I'm obviously super nerding out on tech by writing these books, which are like sci-fi and about gaming and about AI and virtual reality and stuff like that. But one of the interesting things about technology is that it offers the promise of maybe automating a lot of things that we do now as human beings. And in the process of doing so is going to pose the question of us, what does it mean to be a person? And what do you want to do as a human being, right? Like if you could assume that a lot of the tasks that you do today could someday be done by a machine, and like you'd be surprised. Like I was playing around with Chat GPT yesterday, and like it blew my mind, right? I was like, oh, this thing came up with a better speech on politics than I could. Like, I'm not talking about it's automating other people's jobs. AI is going to automate my job, you know, at a certain point. But if you grapple with that question, what is the human pursuit in a tech-enabled future? To me, it is about the creative stuff. It is about the lateral thinking, the being able to, and not necessarily creative just in the art sense, but like, let's say you're looking at a medical problem or a scientific problem or a social problem, being able to like say, well, I saw this thing in Anishinaabe culture, and I wonder if we could connect it to this challenge that we have in our society today. Or I, witnessed this thing in conversation, and I wonder if we could bring that into our organization. And just to have that sort of creative ability to problem solve and to generate and to innovate and to come up with new ideas, I think to me is more important than ever as we live in a technologically powered world. And so to me, how do we inspire young people? One of the messages in the first book was, like, I'm very optimistic about young people. And here's why. Like, I think we turned out pretty good. Think about the generation that Orange Shirt Day is the biggest day on the school calendar for them. What is their Manitoba gonna look like? Like, I think we turned out pretty good. We played a lot of Nintendo. I'm guessing, maybe not. No. You're married to somebody who played a lot of Nintendo. I can say that. We still turned out all right. So I think I
think I had the one where you shoot the geese.
That kind.
Okay, I had that.
Yeah. So, are we going to succeed in saying young people get off the machines, don't use social media? Like, I don't think that's realistic. I think it's more about how can we ensure that young people who are going to use technology growing up can still find the creative spark, can still be able to problem solve, can still be able to communicate with other people in a respectful and healthy way. And to me, I think those are the really interesting societal questions that we should answer going forward. And because, you know, the kids who are able to do those things well in the future are going to be more valuable than ever in terms of the economy, and in terms of culture and society are going to be the ones who are doing really, really interesting things to, I guess, inspire us all. So I'm optimistic, but also, you know, really hopeful we can nudge things in that direction, if that makes sense.
And were there any other questions, Paul? Well, if there are no further questions, I'll turn things over to you folks. If you have any closing comments you might like to make at all.
Well, I just want to thank Tasha for taking the time to be here. Tasha, to me, is one of the really great people we have in this province. New York Times best-selling author, mom, active in traditional culture, but helping to define our contemporary culture, and just defended her PhD dissertation, so is now a doctor, so is an academic and an intellectual. And I just really get energized anytime that I get to spend time with somebody who is like a Renaissance person, who is somebody who has so many different facets of their personality that they're operating at a high level on, that I just feel really grateful for. And obviously thankful that you'll indulge me by reading the books and spending some time here. So yeah, just if you haven't had a chance to check out Tasha's stuff to date, I really encourage you to take a look at what she's up to as well. And miigwech,
thank you. And before we close, and of course, thank Wab for his time. I think let's just thank Wab for his time. And John, who's hiding in the background, I think. There's a lovely table just to the right. So I think what happens now is we clap, and then he gets ushered away to the beautiful table where,
Can I say one more thing?
Yes, of
Because you just
course.
reminded me with the hilarious image of like, I have a bag over my head and, or a jacket, and I'm being like stuck in the back there. I want to say, I thought the Winnipeg Free Press had the funniest write-up about this event in their paper, like in a good way. I like genuinely enjoyed reading it because it began something like, "He's no Prince Harry." But Wab Kinew has a book launch coming up. And he hopes he can spare a few minutes of your time. Like, I read that in the paper. Like, I read the paper every morning. It's like the start of my day. And like, it put a huge smile on my face. Like, I wish I could remember the name of the writer who was in the byline, but I thought they did a great job. And it was just like, yes, that was hilarious.
So let's give a warm applause to the Prince Harry of the Prairies. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, thanks again, everybody.
Yeah. Another one out in the world.
And thank you both so very much. So as Tasha mentioned, we will be moving along to the signing in just a moment. Before we do, I do have a few notes about signing procedure, and there's also been a request from Penguin Team Canada as well. One of the best things about a launch is sometimes taking a joyous crowd photo. So if you would like to be a part of a joyous crowd photo, Stephanie from Penguin Team Canada will be distributing copies of the book and taking a picture of you holding it up and smiling. If you have a copy of the book already, feel free to hold it up yourself. And if you wish to escape from the photo op, please feel free to do also. This is not an aggressive attempt to hand sell this book to you. If you do already have a book or do not wish to purchase one, please feel free to just leave it behind in the seat. But while Stephanie is distributing those books, I'll just let you know a few details about the signing itself. So it will take place at a table, which is just to the right of our cash desk. I'll be over there waving my hand, so you'll be able to find it easily. We have copies of both The Everlasting Road and its predecessor, Walking in Two Worlds, available there. So please do avail yourself of books either from the table or from our cash desk where we also have copies. You can get them signed before you pay for them. Just please do make sure that you pay for them before you leave the store. We are enormously grateful to Duck Hunt Champion and Dr. Tasha Spillett-Sumner for her wonderful hosting this evening, along with our wonderful guest host. And also so very grateful to all of you for joining us. The video will remain live on YouTube, so if you'd like to share it with anybody who wasn't able to make it, please feel free. But otherwise, please join me just before you dramatically hold up your books in acknowledging one final time Tasha Spillett-Sumner and Wab Kinew. Thank you all so much.